Hi there, this is Jen again with day 4 of Food 2016, and today what we're going to chat about is step number 2, stopping eating the wrong foods. And I know yesterday we spent some time on the right foods, and primarily the focus there is a ton of fruits and vegetables, as many as you can eat. There's really no such thing as too many. The wrong foods gets confusing because there is that conflicting information out there. Things that we're told were good for us are now we're being told are bad for us. Things we were told were bad for us are now sometimes being told they're good for us. So it is confusing, but I just want to spend a moment on what that all might look like in terms of the wrong foods. And when I talk about the wrong foods, what I really am looking at is the research that's out there that supports what is right for human beings to be eating. And it doesn't mean that you can't ever eat these foods, but it just means that for thousands and thousands of years we did not, and we experienced vibrant health. And then as our society advanced and it became easier for some of these foods to be available or for some of these foods to be created, they got incorporated in our diet. And over time, 30 years, 60 years, 100 years, they started impacting our long-term health. So I want to start with sort of my top list here. And I want to preface this by saying, you don't have to become a vegan, but you do want to avoid dairy. And here's why. It isn't a source of absorbable calcium or protein, in spite of what the commercials say. And what it does is it promotes inflammation and it adds hormones to your system that you really don't want or need. Hormones are very delicate, and if you start adding some, particularly some from another species, you create some problems and it can wreak havoc with certain bodies. You also want to avoid gluten, and I'm sure you've probably seen all this gluten-free stuff out there, but what is the big deal about gluten-free? Well, it's really protein, and it's the wrong kind. I don't have time in this video to go through it, but check out Robyn O'Brien's TED Talk. If you just do a Google search for TED Talk Robyn O'Brien, you'll get her thing, and she really shows how the protein in wheat has been changed tremendously over the past 2 generations. The third thing you want to avoid is sweeteners. First of all, sugar is addictive. Most of you probably already know that. And artificial sweeteners are chemicals that your brain just doesn't need. So even natural sweeteners like honey and maple syrup can create issues, and I'll spend a second on that. But you just want to avoid them. Fruit is the best substitute for sweeteners. And then number 4 on the list is avoiding alcohol. There are really very few health benefits from alcohol. Some of those are attributed to red wine, and those benefits can actually be obtained from other foods. And then number 5 is avoid caffeine. Now, if you're tired and you say, I can't live without my caffeine, caffeine's probably not the cause of your fatigue, but it's also not the cure. Sometimes, though, caffeine can cause more fatigue over time. Your system's been stimulated beyond the capacity that it needs to recover, and so you can end up with this ongoing cycle of caffeine-induced fatigue, particularly to your stress response. And then you want to avoid all isolated oils. Olive oil is being touted as a health food, but it's not a health food, no matter how cold-pressed or organic it might be. You want to just eat the whole olive. Canola oil is out there all over the place, and canola isn't even a plant. Canola stands for Canada Oil Low Acid. It's from rapeseed oil, and it's been genetically modified to be consumable by humans. Rapeseed oil isn't something that we can really eat. So, this isn't something that you can do right away. This is a process. I understand this, but you really want to keep this list handy and just try and get these things out of your diet. Now, if you left me with that list, I understand. You might have looked at that list and just shut down. But what I want to emphasize here is that this process of getting to a healthier spot is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And there is a way to make these changes easier, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But first of all, why is making these changes so hard to do in the first place? As I'm sure most of you looked at that list and said, well, I don't have a problem giving up X, Y, or Z, but I'm absolutely not going to give up this one. And usually it's because there's a very strong preference for that particular food or that particular substance. And I want to spend a minute on this because these strong preferences are usually quite genetic in nature, and they're compelling. They're not something that willpower can just overcome. We are genetically programmed for certain preferences. We have been hunter-gatherers for many, many, many centuries. And what that lifestyle has created in us is certain preferences. And these preferences favor survival, really, if you think about it. We have a preference for high-fat foods. We have a preference for calorically dense foods. We have a preference for low-fiber foods and a preference for eating a lot at one time. And those four preferences really favor someone who's out there hunting and gathering, where things might be scarce or sparse or not nutritionally dense, or you might come across a plant that's in bloom and yielding, and you need to be able to eat a ton of it all at one time. So these preferences come from millennia of lifestyle habits that have developed into genetic traits. The problem is that when you combine these preferences with a modern industrialized world, you end up with significant health issues. Our preferences work to our advantage only when food and calories are hard to find, but they're very detrimental when food and calories are plentiful and inexpensive. And the other dynamic that you're facing here is we live in this modern age where there are these companies that understand these preferences. And this article you should definitely find and read. It's called The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. And these companies that are processing and creating food have understood that if they can appeal to those four preferences that we have, they can keep us eating their food probably for most of our lives. And so as a result of this, we tend to eat a horrific diet. Every year, the typical American eats 756 pounds of cakes and cookies, 23 gallons of ice cream, 7 pounds of potato chips, 22 pounds of candy, 200 sticks of gum, 365 servings of soda, 90 pounds of fat, and 134 pounds of refined sugar. So that's not a very pretty list, and when you combine that with what's going on country to country, you can see that the result here is that we tend to be one of the most, if not the most, obese nation in the world, mostly because of affluence and availability. Now, a lot of people think, well, you know, what's the problem with a few extra pounds? But there are some significant risks with a few extra pounds, particularly in terms of cancer. And I learned this through my dad's process, that cancer is in many ways a disease of excess fat. And the reason is that fat's not inert. Fat cells produce estrogen, and that promotes cell growth. And fat cells also produce a bunch of proteins that cause inflammation and insulin resistance. I think we all have heard of the connection of extra weight with diabetes. But when you have that inflammation and insulin resistance, that also promotes cell growth and cell reproduction. Now, fat around the waistline is even more active in producing these growth stimulants. So particularly if you have extra weight around your waist, you've just got more of these substances circulating in your blood. And the more often your cells divide, there's just more opportunity for cancer to develop. And so you want to really keep that down as low as you possibly can. And again, remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That's something that you would do over time. So, you know, a lot of people also say to me, well, you know, we're overweight, but we're not that overweight. But I want to just spend a second here and go through some slides really quickly. These are the obesity trends among U.S. adults in the United States from 1985 forward. And if you look at this chart, it just escalates very, very rapidly over 2 decades. And it's shocking when you think about what's going on in terms of the health risks that this creates. It's very, very challenging to have extra weight and be as healthy as you can be. So let's talk about weight for a second. Why is it so challenging to lose it and keep it off? I mean, you can't go through a grocery store without seeing checkout line, without seeing 2 or 3 magazines talking about helping you lose weight, because everybody tries to lose it, and they may, but very few people actually keep it off. And that's really where our program has a very different philosophy, and here's why. If you look at this picture across the top on the gray section, you'll see what the average person does in terms of losing weight. They try dieting or over-exercising, you know, just suddenly deciding they're going to exercise. And what happens when you do that is Yes, you do lose weight, but you do it in a way that does not eliminate the toxins that are in your body. And the primary reason that your body has extra fat, aside from an abundance of food energy that it's storing, is that it's trying to protect your vital organs from toxins. And we're exposed to toxins all the time. You know, there's car exhaust, there's industrial pollution, there's off-gassing from fabrics, there's just stuff everywhere. I mean, it's pretty hard unless you're living in a forest a million miles from anywhere to avoid toxins. So that's just part and parcel with what's going on. And so you have to be eating a diet that helps your body eliminate. Now, I'll talk about this a little in a couple videos from now, but pretty much when you decrease your intake of calories and you increase your exercise, but you do it in a way that doesn't focus on eliminating the impurities that your body has stored and is trying to protect your internal organs from, you're actually concentrating the toxins in your body. And that's one reason why oftentimes people will say, yeah, I'm on this diet and I feel awful, because what they're really doing is they're increasing the percentage of toxicity in their body. They've actually got more impurities in their body. And so when they start eating a maintenance diet again, they haven't gotten rid of any of the impurities that the fat was trying to protect the internal organs from in the first place. And so the body goes crazy and says, okay, now we really have to protect the internal organs because they've had some exposure. And you'll have a rebound where you actually retain more fat and sometimes produce more fat than what you had in the first place. So understandably, that's a very discouraging place to be. What we focus on instead is not dieting or over-exercising, but in fact, cleansing. Really trying to address the primary reason why your body has the fat, which is keeping your body safe from toxins. And so if you focus on cleansing by giving the body the nutrients that it needs to eliminate the toxins, and it's a lot of nutrients, and that's why step 6 is adding nutritional density, and I'll spend some time on that. But if you focus on giving the body the nutrients it needs to cleanse, then it will shed the fat because of reduced toxicity. And then when you go back to a maintenance diet, which is not going to be hugely different because you're not really dieting in the first place, you're just making some lifestyle changes. Not only do you have better overall health, you have less fat and you have more muscle, but you don't have that rebound effect. You don't have that situation where you're suddenly grabbing onto every ounce of food energy that your body can muster and putting it into fat production and fat storage to protect yourself from toxins. So it's a very different philosophy, and I think that if you can understand this primary difference, it will help you, because this is a process. This isn't something that happens overnight, but if you can focus on cleansing and rejuvenating as opposed to eliminating and restricting and depriving yourself, you're going to have a healthier outcome and also a much more successful outcome. So tomorrow we're going to talk about step 3, drinking water, because that's a huge part of this equation. But I hope that that makes some sense to you in terms of why you need to focus on a slightly different philosophy in terms of what the wrong foods are, why they're so hard to avoid, but then what the ramifications are if you think in terms of cleansing rather than in terms of deprivation. I think you'll find it a much easier way to move forward. So hope that's helpful, and look forward to sharing more information on the next video.